Good afternoon. At the annual meeting of the County Council held on 15 May 2024, Mr. Gillard was nominated as Chairman-elect to the Highways and Transport. Can I have a proposer and a seconder that Mr. Gillard be nominated Chair?
Happy to propose Mr. Gillard.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Mr. Gillard, you are appointed Chairman of the Highways and Transport OSC for the 2024-25 year. Is that agreed? Thank you. Mr. Gillard, you are appointed Chairman of the Highways and Transport OSC for the 2024-25 year, and I will hand over to you for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Akio, and thank you, colleagues. Welcome to today's meeting of the Highways and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is taking place at County Hall, Glenfield. This meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website. It will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can everyone please switch their microphones on when speaking and turn off when finished speaking. Additionally, I'm sure all members of the committee are aware that we are currently in the pre-election period of heightened sensitivity running up to the general election. Take particular care in any debate this afternoon. I've received apologies from Mrs. Ack and welcome Mr. Hunt, who is substituting this afternoon. Appointment of Deputy Chairman, item 2. I move Mr. Merry. Can I have a seconder, please? We agree. Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March 23. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March 24 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Agreed? Thank you. Question time. I've received 3 questions from members of the public today. Would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on these. The questions and its responses have been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of the meeting and will be taken as read. I understand a supplementary question has been received from Mr. McClellan, who is unable to attend this afternoon, and I will now invite Mr. Hunt to ask the supplementary question on his behalf.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McClellan asks, given the known weakness in the highways design at this location, the understood mechanisms for failure, and the recently demonstrated consequences when failure occurs, as it has every year to date, and even with modifications, why can the gully not be cleared out more proactively than once every 10 months, either routinely after Christmas or, say, on a 6-month cycle? 6-monthly cycle.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. I will now ask the officers whether they're able to respond. That's supplementary. Pat?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. So the gully is in Lockington. We are aware of the gully up at Lockington and the challenges it poses. So priority 1 is something is in conjunction with our gully cleansing, our routine gully cleansing operation, and it's delivered by an external contractor. With regards to, we do have some specialist gullies around the county, Lockington being one and Churchill Road being a second one that springs to mind. What we can do is put additional cleansing on them at known times using our reactive maintenance crew that we've got around the county. So we will increase the cleansing on that particular gully.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Mr. Hunt, for asking that supplementary. I'm going to move on to item 5, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7. I've not received any questions from members. Item 6, there are no urgent items. 7, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do any members have any declarations you wish to make? Item 8, declarations of the party whip in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. Are there any declarations of the party whip? 10. Our first substantive item is the Leicestershire Highways Design Guide refresh, which is on pages 17 to 50 of your agenda. Can I welcome to the meeting the Cabinet Lead member, Mr. O'Shea. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Shea.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Director and Carruthers, the Assistant Directors, Jenna Walker and Pat Clark. Can I also welcome Maggie Wright as well. Members of the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee have been invited to participate in the 2 items on the agenda this afternoon. Can I welcome you to the meeting? I'm going to hand over to Jenna now to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report may feel familiar to this committee. We've brought an update on the development of the design guide a few times because the content of the report is really quite broad. It covers our policies in relation to highways design and delivery, and also technical guidance. You may remember previously this report builds on discussions we've had around the principles of the design guide, which were approved by Cabinet, and engagement with yourselves, the development industry and planning authorities as well. And I'd like to thank you for your input into the process so far. So the purpose of this report is to seek your views as the committee on the content of the draft design guide and to provide you with an update on the work done so far. So the Leicestershire Highways Design Guide, the LHDG as we affectionately call it in the department, provides guidance regarding highways and transportation infrastructure for new developments in the areas where the County Council is the local highway authority. The principal intention and purpose of the design guide is to have a consistent approach to design and construction of new highway development across Leicestershire, and clearly over the time has developed as well to influence transport, the way that transport integrates with new development, as well as just road highways. So paragraphs 13 to 37 within the report set out sort of a high-level summary of the proposed changes and principles behind the development of the new design guide. They touch on a number of areas, include highways development management. So that is a role in which the County Highway Authority responds to planning applications. We're a consultee in that process and provide responses on things like the way that development will be accessed by all forms of transport and traffic, highway network safety and network management. There's design guidance. What sort of design standards are we designing to? That includes updates on active and sustainable travel, green infrastructure, sustainable urban drainage and trees. There's also sections on maintenance, materials and construction. So what type of materials will we allow onto the adopted highway? How we'll maintain them, what the costs of maintaining them are, and also the process of adoption. As I mentioned, we've previously done some engagement with developers and local planning authorities, and now we are doing a formal 6-week consultation exercise planned for June, so 24th of June 2024. There's an online questionnaire available on the Council's website, and of course we'll include your views today and through the process. As part of the previous engagement, this committee provided feedback, and we have set out responses to that feedback in paragraph 40. There's several sections to paragraph 40. It's not just one paragraph that covers that input. There's also a summary report attached to the main report, setting out the changes, the rationale for them and the benefits of that. And the reason we've done that is because the actual publication version of the design guide that we want to consult on is undergoing some kind of work in terms of presentational elements, and also the design guide itself is pretty hefty document. The current version is available online, and the one we've attached just sets out anything that's changed, anything that's new and been removed, and hopefully helps you focus on the areas of change that you'll be interested in. So on that basis, Chair, if it's okay, I'll just leave it there and answer any questions.
Thank you, Jenna. So the recommendation, we are asked to note the report and the comments made by members today will be presented to Cabinet in September. Are there any questions? I'll take David first.
Just a general comment. I think this is very much to be welcomed. It'd be interesting to see to what degree the industry responds, and to what degree any objections by our own departments are upheld by the planning inspectorate. But I think this is a very, it is this is an advance, and I think it should be welcomed.
Thank you for them positive comments, David. Mr. Bolter.
Oh dear, yes. Welcome the report. One thing I'd like to, I welcome especially page 20, item 24. But is air quality been taken into account on this agenda at all? Because road services do affect air quality, but I can't see anywhere here it mentions air quality.
Jana, can you answer that?
Yeah, so the responsibility for air quality overall, clearly highways has a big impact on that, and I'm not disputing that at all, is something we share with the district authorities. So as part of the planning process as a whole, air quality will be taken into account, and we clearly in the design guidance seek to reduce congestion, things that contribute to it. We haven't explicitly measured air quality as a design guide requirement because it's not quite within our remit and responsibilities under the guide, but clearly we're aware of how transport can contribute to air quality and work with the planning authorities where required to address that.
Thank you. Anne, you wanted to come in?
Just to add as a kind of aside to that, obviously as well as time moves on and our knowledge, I'm thinking about climate adaptation. You know, as new information comes out, the types of materials we should be using on our carriageways, etc., we will be flexible in that. This doesn't set that kind of thing, but sets parameters for it. You know, so we may be air quality benefits, I was going to say, as we are beginning to move towards adapting our highways and transport towards that being far more resilient to climate change. I'm just thinking about Adapting is got work going on under DFT funding called Live Labs, 30 million. Part of that is a project into a centre of excellence into materials to be used to decarbonise across highways. We start to bring those things forward as, you know, they're tested and tried, etc. We'll get a number of benefits. Some of that may help with air quality, but it's just generally there is the ethos of flexibility. We know we have to change to changing technology, changing market, etc. that drives all these better outcomes, including air quality.
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a very quick question, officers. Could you confirm that as part of the refresh, the minimum dimensions for a parking space or a garage are such that you can get a car in and open a door to get in and out of it? Thank you.
So we've addressed the question, I think, in the response in paragraph 40. I think in terms of minimum specification for garages being built, that's not something that we can necessarily influence, but minimum specification for garages that will be counted as a parking space, that is the case. Slightly, I know it's a slightly technical answer to differentiate, but yeah, we wouldn't count them as a parking space if you can't open the car once you're in there.
Thank you for the question and the answer. Thank you. Mr. Harrison.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to add a comment to what the officer's already made to Mr. Bolter. Sadly, historically, for many, many years, it's the district councils that do all the measuring of particulate matter. I only wished of many occasions that we were doing it, but we're not, and therefore we're reliant on their energy and enthusiasm on how they go about it. We can widen roads and do all sorts of things, but we have no control over that as an input. So I know the look on your face was in amazement, but truthfully, that is how it's been for many, many years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Andy Jackson, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add on the air quality comments that we do have a short section on air quality management areas, so that's within the design guide and signposts to the district and borough councils. However, there are some things that, although not explicitly referenced within the guidance as air quality, there are things that we're doing that impact on air quality, just thinking about trees and their the way they capture particulates. What Anne mentioned earlier about the types of materials we're using to make sure the performance of vehicles on the highway are not increasing the amount of particulates and etc. that are caused by those materials. So although it's not explicitly referenced, there are things that impact on those particulates within the guidance.
Thank you, Andy. Mr. Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. I could ask 20 questions, but Chair won't let me. So I've got a couple of questions, I think. One relates to the potential opportunities for new developments and how far we could leverage effectively the Section 106 and the active travel packs and to a wider consideration. So I see travel packs come through for a residential development, but it only relates to those houses that are being built. And it's always sort of struck me, well, why can't we offer something to the neighbouring properties? Now, legislatively, we may not be able to, I don't know. And I think the other one for me relates to, I'm desperately trying to find which paragraph it was now, about footways and trying to discourage pavement parking, which I'm sure for all of us members, we have regular inbox emails about pavement parking and those kind of obstructions. Certainly in my patch, there is a relatively new development where the curb height seems to be relatively low compared to the older designs. But there's also then speed tables up that road, which then kind of almost remove the curb, so people are using them to actually get on. So I'm sort of curious in the design guide how you kind of offset the two, if that makes sense, as to discouraging parking, pavement parking, but then when there's a speed table, it actually assists people to get onto the curb. So anyway, just those 2 points, me, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Phillimore. Jenna, can you answer that, or Anne?
I'll go first, and then Anne will likely fill in anything I forget. So just in terms of the new development, the scope for kind of implementing measures or anything else, it is largely guided by the SIL test. So the key one that tends to stop us doing things with existing is that directly dependent, the impact being directly dependent on the new development. But that's not to say, and particularly with the work we're doing with Active Travel England, if we were to be able to progress some of the work that was proposed under Local Transport Fund, obviously we've got a pause on the guidance at the moment where we're looking at area-based work. There isn't anything to stop us from thinking about building on the investment of new development and working with the local area. But obviously, clearly at the minute, that's something that we're just waiting for more guidance on. But I think it would be very difficult for us to use developer funding for existing developments to increase active and sustainable travel with the current legislation. Do you want to come back on that for answer the second part?
Yes. So thanks, Jack. Because I've got this bit in my head that says, a village, a assessment, whatever. New residential for development there, travel pack, walk, ride, cycle, diddly-dee. 40-year-old build, another new development, diddly-dee. And we've got this bit in the middle that kind of doesn't link to the two. So it's that bit I'm interested in, is how we actually kind of link everything together.
Yeah, I think in terms of infrastructure, there is more scope where there's missing links, clearly, where the demand has grown over time. No one individual development perhaps necessitated that link, but together they do. You get to a point where that becomes the level of demand for that link through the new development would warrant it. But again, I think, to be honest, some of those local either pinch points or missing links would have been, I think, the intended focus for some of the local transport fund money, because they're the type of things that come out. But like I say, we can't comment on when or how we might find out a bit more about that at the moment. And I think you'd have to consider each individual development, whether it had the scope for that. In terms of the second part, I think that was the pavement parking is clearly a concern we've taken on board from yourselves, and we have answered in paragraph 40A some of those issues. So the design guidance itself places an emphasis on the developer to try and reduce the risk of pavement parking largely through things like providing adequate off-road parking as a starting point. We know that households now in some areas do have multiple cars, and that is an issue that we're working through. There's other opportunities for things like sort of managing bollards or verges where necessary. So the intention is for the guidance to, especially with new development, clearly plan for that not to be the case. I think there are some, there is a sort of constant learning cycle about design and development as to how people react to those settings, whether people then do still continue to park on pavements anyway. But we are working with the planning authorities and obviously through the design guidance to try and discourage pavement parking as far as we can.
Thank you, Jenna. Anne, Pat, anything to add?
I mean, I'll just add the point about speed tables. Obviously, they're there to make sure the traffic keeps at a low speed, isn't it? So they're there for one particular thing. The whole thing about pavement parking, it's more about a cultural and behaviour thing. As Jana says, we're doing what we can to make sure there isn't the need for, on-street parking. That in most places you could park quite happily on street without needing to go onto the pavement. And as we all know, the highway code's quite clear on that. So it was a behavioural issue. And actually, your point about, the speed table might assist people in doing that. I think if they're going to do it, they're going to do it, bump up a curb as opposed to a speed table. And the reason for the speed table is to keep those speeds low. So it is a safer environment for that residential community or whatever community it is.
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Hunt, you wanted to come in?
I don't know how we deal with households with multiple vehicles. I really don't. But my question partly arises at the very beginning of the report. It talks about access for all, and particularly with respect to, as I'm thinking, as in respect of footpaths and pavements and so on. Is there much in here that can give some hope for people with disability vehicles? I don't mean the motorised ones necessarily, but anyone who has a disability. So when we say access for all, do we mean disabled people essentially, particularly in this area of footways and so on? And then my main interest was on the bullet point on page 38, which says a new chapter on the design. On the design and diversion stopping up of public rights of way. That's all it says. So I thought I'd like to ask you what that meant, and where we can find more information about it. It's basically rights of way.
Jenna?
No problem, thank you. And actually if I can take the second one first, I think it's important clarification. I think where we've added that in is not because we are seeking to encourage the stopping up of public rights of way or have that. It's that sometimes when development comes forward, and you've probably had this in your patches, it's necessary to either divert right of way and provide a new link. And what we're trying to do is put up front what the process for that is. So it's a confirmation of process, either for stopping up a public rights of way or the highway in general, where sometimes development comes, either changes the line or changes the use of highway. I don't want it to be really clear that it's not a sort of strategy to reduce the amount of public rights of way. It's just about the clarity of the process. And then just the first point around access for all. I think when we were working on this, if we're honest, the emphasis on that was about modes of travel, being more placing more emphasis on access for pedestrians, cyclists and public transport when we're talking about the main access for development. Quite often and traditionally, when you're talking about severe impact and having safe and suitable access, a lot of that is focused on highway modes, so road vehicle modes. However, I would say clearly, obviously, we have used equality impact assessments to inform the development of the design guide, by having better footway, particularly standards and access to development would benefit people with mobility issues in that sense as well. So I think there is hope, if you like, you're in there, and a greater emphasis towards that. by generally giving more weight to sustainable modes in terms of access to development in our assessment through the planning process.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Thank you for answering them, Jenna. Put your microphone on, please, Mr. Hunt.
Are we really pushing for rights of way in general, or is it something which is perhaps belongs to the last century?
I think I would agree by the level of interest we have from the general public contacting us about rights of way. It's definitely not a thing from a previous century, and very much a concern to communities as well as ourselves. I think we are really keen to work to maintain public rights of way as part of an existing network, but also I think sort of linking with the comments made where new developments are coming forward, where links need to be made. We are really keen to do that. And again, I think you've seen a support of that in national guidance as well from places like Active Travel England would make use of public rights of way for walking access, not necessarily always for cycling, wheeling. So yeah, I think we're far from thinking that public rights of way are something of the past. They're very, very relevant to us in our day-to-day work and in terms of planning for future developments as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you. I'm sorry to call you back again, but I'm quite aware that air quality is a district responsibility, but it's affected by the county. If the county allow blockage of the highway by buses stopping on the highway rather than pulling off, it affects the air quality, which the district's responsible for. There's no little about it because the bus is blocking the road and traffic's held up. So it's important that in this design guide and everything else, that the highway is kept clear of obstructions, particularly buses. And it doesn't make that any comment in here whatsoever, but Anne knows what the area I represent is a major problem with a bus stop that stops in the middle of the highway and stops the traffic for
I think, Mr. Bolter, that's quite prevalent all over Northwest, all over Leicestershire. What you're talking about is having pull-ins for buses, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, opportunity was there for the county to do something about it. New development took place and didn't think about it. That's what I object to.
It's a valid point. Thank you. Anna, Jenna, can you answer?
Yeah, I think to say that the intention of the design guide is to ensure that the smooth operation of traffic around new development resulting from that. I'm happy, again, to have a look at as you know from this committee, we've talked before, quite often things that come forward as they're built in development were decided a number of years ago when they went through planning or technical approval. Happy to have a look at the particular instance, but in general, I agree with the principle of what you're saying, that we want to reduce kind of obstruction to free-flowing traffic because it has that impact on the highway. But clearly as well, the more we can achieve mode shift in new development, so the more people that travel either by public transport or by walking and cycling as well, that's also part of the guide to help with the emissions and particulates that we've been talking about. So as Andy said, we haven't sort of directly referenced it perhaps as you would want to see, but a lot of the measures that we are putting in place would have benefits for and support air quality and the flow of traffic that has that impact or has poor impact potentially on air quality.
Thank you, Jenna. Andy, did you want to come in?
Just to say that we do have guidance on the provision of laybys and also reference to clearways, so that highways that are designated as clearways aren't obstructed by buses. So the provision of laybys, the design of laybys, is something that's included in the design guide. And then we've got highway development management policy, which sets out just what Jan has said, which is about that development shouldn't impact on the wider network. So we should maintain that effectiveness of the wider network.
Thank you, Andy. No further questions. Mr. O'Shea, sorry to keep you waiting. I know you're sitting patiently on a balcony somewhere. So any comments you'd like to make?
No, really, it's been a very good discussion, really, and very interesting. I'd just like to add that I think Jana has eloquently described the refresh, and I totally support it. But the questions this afternoon have been very good, and it's added to the debate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Mrs. Wright, any comment?
No, just really to look out for the formal consultation that's coming out on the 24th of June, and then the results following that.
Thank you. Okay, so as I said earlier, the recommendation, we are asked to note the report and the comments made by members today will be presented to Cabinet in September. Agreed? Thank you. Moving on to item 11. Now I have a report on the electric vehicle charging strategy on pages 51 to 134. Anne, you're presenting this report, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as committee is aware, we've got, as the County Council, targets against net zero for our own operations by 2035 and for the wider county by 2050. This strategy will be just one element in support of that work towards those targets. Just a wee bit of context first on EVs. Modelling suggests that in Leicestershire, we could have 25% of cars being EVs by 2030. Obviously, that then assumes we need the right infrastructure there to support that. As part of this, more publicly accessible charging points are needed, especially where home charging isn't possible, people don't have driveways, etc. You know, there's many areas like that across the county. Hence, government's encouraging all local highway authorities to have an EV charging strategy. Hence, we're bringing this to you now and developing this work up. The strategy itself, it provides the framework for how we would look to see that infrastructure, charging infrastructure provided across the county. The goals and objectives, the high-level goals and objectives, we'd want to see that implemented by, they're set out in paragraph 34 and 35 of the report for you, just in summary. The scope of the strategy covers electric vehicle infrastructure that's provided by the council and will become a council asset. So we're not talking about private developments or off-street in car parks, etc. We're talking about stuff on the highway and that we will maintain in future, or other council-owned land. I should add that one as well, not just the highway. As you'll see from the strategy, if you've had a chance to have a look at it, we're proposing to focus on the areas where home charging is not available, and also to ensure that there's a real spread across the county. We carried out extensive public consultation last autumn on this, and we sought information on people's charging habits if they already have an EV, concerns they had around that, potential locations they would want to put forward for infrastructure points, and that's all gone into helping shape the strategy that's come before you today. The appendix, one of the appendices, just summarise that for you, and paragraph 48 as well covers it at a high level. In terms of funding to deliver the rollout, because that's the key thing, isn't it, actually delivering on the ground? Strategy sets the framework, however, it's the delivery that's going to make the difference. The government launched its local electric vehicle infrastructure fund, so they call it LEVI. Okay, and that's aimed primarily for low power charging points, so that it can facilitate the likes of overnight charging on street. First of all, they issued a 10 million pilot project, and we as LCC were part of a consortium with 4 other councils and Midlands Connect in bidding into that. And that consortium secured 1 million of funding towards 350 charging points across those areas. We, as Leicestershire, were allocated 200,000 of that to deliver up to 100 charge points. We're currently procuring, if I can even say it, a charge point operator who will help us design and then implement those charge points. There is, however, a bigger fund, the main fund. That 10 million was a pilot. There's a main fund of LEVI funding from the government, and we have secured provisionally across a consortium with Midlands Connect and a number of other councils, £3.1 million. We're continuing to carry out work on the full business case that goes into government to ensure that we actually can draw down on that funding. We've also had some capacity funding, so that's resource for officers in order to work up the bid and then get on with the early stage of development and delivery of 530,000 to us. So that's really going to help boost us moving that forward. Just in summary then, we'd really appreciate your comments on the draft strategy which is appended to your report. And just a final point, we would propose to review the strategy in 2 years, just because you'll appreciate it's a very fast moving area, both in the technology and the charging infrastructure itself. And equally, we'll learn from the pilot, as will other things happening across the country. We'll learn from that as well. So we want to update it to make sure that the further investment is reflecting the travelling behaviour, vehicle ownership, etc. across the county. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Right, over to colleagues. Any comments, questions? Mr. Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. Very clearly, lots of big ticks in this document. So thank you for that. I think it's almost inevitable, because I'm started life as an electromechanical engineer, that as far as power capacity within our cabling is significant, because we've downgraded or upgraded from SOCs to LEDs. So we should have significant capacity within the lighting circuit. The question I've got, and it's a difficult one, I guess, to answer, is some of the solutions, part solutions, are to put street lighting charging points in, particularly where there's no off-street parking for residents. And I'm curious how society, for want of a better phrase, is actually going to be able to manage that, because because they're 3 kilowatts, they're very slow charge, they will be on overnight, and it will become a first come, first served situation. And I'm just kind of cautiously curious, I think, about how that might impact locally, socially, if you've got 3 people all trying to get to the same charging point, but it's a first come, first served. So I'm just curious how we kind of facilitate or manage that potential.
Anne, you want to say that?
We've got it all sorted. We
Oh,
know
that's all right.
exactly how we're going to do it. No, absolutely. I mean, this is learning across the country, isn't it? It's entirely new. You're absolutely right. I mean, and I think, and it did come out, I think, in our consultation as well, most people obviously would want the rapid chargers. The difficulty is the amount of power and the cost of those. So it has to be a balance between the slower chargers and the rapid ones. But equally, who's to say that in 2-3 years' time, there isn't another move forward and, we're all in super duper fast ones, and, what was considered rapid today is actually a much more economic proposition than it is at this point in time. Life keeps moving, doesn't it? But you're absolutely right. We're probably going to be faced with thinking about systems and solutions whereby communities are looking for, because I don't see anybody getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to move their car so their neighbour can plug in their vehicle. It's just not going to happen, is it? We're going to have to work our way around it and find other solutions and way of operating. Whether that's local communities say, okay, local car park further 2 streets down, they've got charge points there, I'll plug mine in overnight there tonight because I haven't managed to get there quick enough for the one in my street, or a whole host of different things. I just think we're going to have to keep learning on that one, because we haven't got all the answers at the moment.
So, great answer. I like the answer. Does that mean we're potentially going to look at this at some kind of macro level? So we'll say, okay, if we put a street light charging point there and a street light point, what are the other options in that macro environment to actually ease that social bit?
We have a very extensive database of, the provision across the county. There's been an incredible amount of work going into that. So that includes looking at, mapping what's already there, be it in a Tesco's car park or be it in a district authority car park, etc., other off-street things. Obviously, the other thing as well, we're not quite so up on, but will become a factor is, for instance, your employer. Can you take your car to work and plug it in at work for 8 hours while you're at work? So you don't need to charge it overnight, and if you don't have an off street, there's a whole host of other things. But we do have quite an extensive database that actually allows us to say there is a gap in this area because there isn't off street options for them elsewhere or other options in the local area. Therefore, we really need to be, this has to be a priority, this area, to put in some infrastructure.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Bolton.
Sure, yes. Is our policy the same as the city policy? I understand some discrepancy at the moment between what city allow and what we allow with home charging points. The other one is, going back through history, I know, but we are insistent that our vehicles park at right angles to the property, not at any angle, which limits the number you can actually get in, because if you could park at an angle, you can actually get charging point at your house. But at the moment, a lot of terrace houses, you can't get it in. It's got to be right angles. If we were to change the policy, we get more cars off the street, home charging. I don't know if anybody's looked at that, but at the minute you can't get permission to have a charging point unless you park at 90 degrees to your property.
No, thank you. New tech comes, doesn't it? And we all got a host of other different challenges and issues we need to kind of try and resolve. Absolutely. In terms of the first answer, we've devised our policy, we feel, as suitable for our geographic area. Now, the city has different characteristics. They have far more high density, lots more housing that has no off-street parking, etc. No doubt their policy will be more appropriate for their area. So, we're very focused on what's suitable. I'm not aware of any massive discrepancies. However, I'd say we're designing our policies appropriate for our geographic areas, and you'll appreciate we've got some differences there. In terms of that latter point, I'd say we're probably on a journey. As you know, we've revised our standards for the length of driveway somebody has in order to accommodate. We've reduced that down. However, it does all stem from the safety point of view. Historically, it's always been you should actually reverse into your drive so you can drive out forward, but though we can't control that, but that's actually, I think, in the highway code. But that's why we've always required the straight on, the right angle to the road, isn't it? Rather than people negotiating potentially over a footway, driving over a footway, or manoeuvring across a footway to get in basically parallel to their property. So our stance is there for those safety-based reasons. I think all I can say at the moment is, as I kind of said with this whole strategy in this whole area, we probably need to keep things under review and might want to, in regular periods to review and see what's appropriate. And that's taking learning from other areas as well. There's pilots on different aspects. For instance, I hesitate to bring it up, but I will. Trailing cables. There's no answer at the moment to trailing cables. However, there's a number of authorities who are piloting different things. What we want to do is look at that, take the learning, what works, what doesn't work, what might be suitable for us. And I'd say the same thing might apply to driveways. At the moment, it's still straight, parallel, not parallel, straight onto your house. But, we would want to review that over time.
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. So 3 questions, please, Anne. The first one, which follows on from Mr. Bolter. So in terms of our policy for drop curbs, I've been approached by a number of constituents or residents who wanted a drop curb to allow them to get onto the front of their property to charge the car off street. And we've got a minimum of 5.5 metres, which is quite generous for a lot of modern cars. Could we consider a dispensation for EV owners to review it on a case-by-case basis, depending on what vehicle they've got? Second one, are other solutions being explored? So, for example, are we aware if there's any plans to introduce hydrogen fuel infrastructure into the county? It's always nice to have a plan B. And also probably the other one, which is the elephant in the room, is can the actual core infrastructure actually cope? Do we know what kind of plans there are to upgrade it? The example locally I'm aware of was the Desford Crossroads. They had a super smashing great big new revamp with a load of fast chargers. And I think they couldn't turn them on for 6 or 12 months, because if they did, they'd have blacked out Enderby and Desford. So I think it's now been resolved, but it's something that was discovered after they'd done it, and has wider connotations. If lots more people are going to be having chargers, we might be needing a lot more candles. Thank you, Chair.
Quite a lot to deal with there, Anne. Can you answer?
Some very pertinent questions, and assume I'm a traffic engineer, not an energy specialist. But anyway, we'll have a go at them. Okay, yeah. You've got to be flexible in this life, haven't you? On the vehicle access, we have dropped down the length, and I had thought it was from 5.5 to 5, but I get your principle, so we have reviewed it and reduced it. But, I know we've had challenges of people saying, I haven't quite got 5, can I have less, etc. Our view is the 5 is the suitable one. Vehicles are getting larger, EVs are getting larger. Because they're heavier, they're having to get larger. So we aren't seeing the trend. Traditionally, I know from years and years ago, a parking space was 2.4 by 4.8 meters. Now, you ever park beside a car that just squeezes in because it's massive? It's really difficult to get out your door, isn't it? Vehicles are getting bigger and EVs are heavier, and they're all getting bigger for the economy of scales to carry that heavier battery, etc. So our view is we have looked at it. We do understand, people want to get EVs, they want to be able to park them off, and we feel 5 meters is appropriate. I'm going to caveat that to, we have dropped it from 5.5 to 5, because I'm pretty sure we have dropped it, but I think that was what it was. In terms of hydrogen seems to be a bit further off for vehicles. Yes, there's been hydrogen buses, and I know they're particularly looking at them for HGVs, because at the moment EVs isn't a viable option for the majority of HGVs. There is talk in Derbyshire, and I think around the Freepoint area, about a potential hydrogen hub there. But in terms of rollout, for the way we're seeing at the moment, EVs for, your, my car, etc., general public, I don't think we're quite there. I think hydrogen is as a follower is coming up. What that then needs in terms of infrastructure for us to try and accommodate across the county, we're not yet clear. I think we're too early on that. However, there could well be other fuel technologies that come up as well, and we'll need to, consider those when they come forward. But I think we're just a bit early for hydrogen yet. And whether that then is competitive with an EV, I don't know. But it may have specific markets such as HGVs. On the I think that's a really, really good question, that one about, do we have the core power there for it? One of the criteria for looking at where we're putting the infrastructure is to do that test that there is the power there. Now, I think we all know, and we could all quote instances where we've heard where there's an issue, somebody can't get a power in. And a bit I'll quote for you is, I was at an event recently, and somebody from Toyota in Derbyshire was there. They said they were trying to expand their facility for EVs, etc. They had contacted the National Grid and were told they can get a connection in the 2030s, sometime in the 2030s. They were given a date in. So I think the initial answer is, in a lot of areas it might not be there, and it might not be quick. But in terms of what we're putting in, we will be checking that local area. And obviously it's a much, much lower requirement for 1 or 2 charge points than if you're trying to change your whole logistics business onto EVs, for instance. But it is an ongoing issue nationwide.
Thank you. Mr. Lovegrove, had your question been answered?
I'll ask it and I'll see if it has been. I'll be put in my place.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you very much for the report. Very timely. On the way in today, there was a car programme on Radio 2 about no more internal combustion engines by 2030. And I'm speaking from the Netherlands of the Vale of Belvoir, and I think some of the residents in my patch are closer to Grantham and Nottingham than they are to Leicester. So these are very rural villages, and when I introduced them to the survey last autumn, they were very excited about the prospect, particularly through the parish council, of having village community power point charging. So it's about when that pilot will be delivered and what criteria you might be using, because I don't think there's anything in the survey about the criteria and then if there's any extra criteria that they need to might make applicable to their situation, because they may have fallen foul of not meeting the criteria this time around. So they'd be very excited to hear, A, if they've got approval for the pilot, and if they failed the pilot because they haven't met the criteria, what the criteria might be going forwards. And then the second one is, again, rural areas. There aren't many community-based places where community charging points can be put. And I get constantly asked about having their own personal charging points. And a lot of the times, and you briefly mentioned it, is about cables across pavements. And that is something where I think at the moment on the County Council website, it says we're referring to national guidance, and that's all there is. And so I have people who live in terraced houses who are keen to have an electric vehicle in a rural setting, but there's no information either from national government or county council about how they're going to get power to their vehicle, and they don't really want to rely on a community-based one. And if there's no internal combustion engines sold from 2030, this is going to be a growing subject, not one that is lessening. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lovegrove. Anne?
Firstly, I would never endeavour to put Mr. Lovegrove in his place, but I will endeavour to answer his questions. The pilot will start. We're procuring our charge point operator at the moment, and we hope to start implementing in the autumn. That's on the pilot. The full one, which has more charge points with it and more amounts of money, we still have to go through getting the full business case ticked off from DFT before we're guaranteed the money, and we're due to put that in December. But we've got the money for the pilot, and that will start rolling out in the autumn. I can't quote criteria off my head to you at the moment. However, we are very aware that the rural areas need them as well. Yes, we need to look at the areas of population, but there will be provision in rural areas. But equally within the context of the pilot, there's only so many. We've got up to 100, so we have to space those out. But we're not forgetting the rural areas, because we absolutely understand they will need access to charging as well if they don't have their own, particularly if they don't have their own off-street parking. You did mention the trailing cables thing. There is no national guidance on this, and local authorities have been pressing DFT to bring that out, and nothing has been coming forward, basically because I think it's quite a difficult area. When we are looking locally at what we're doing, obviously we have to consult our legal and insurance colleagues. And for instance, things like, one thing you could do is a rubber mat over the cable. We're not permitted to do that for insurance purposes. There are other things happening in other areas of the country, and this is where it's really, really good to look at what other people are doing. We're aware of some pilots where some authorities are doing a small number of digging trenches, basically from your front door across your footway. I personally, with the responsibility of maintaining nearly 5,000 kilometres of road out there with nowhere near enough money to do that, do not want to see trenches dug right across our footways all over this county, because they will crumble, they will fall to bits, they will need maintenance, and we do not have enough money to maintain our footways at the moment. That is not the answer. However, we will look at the areas that are trialling that kind of thing. There isn't an easy answer to trailing cables, but one of the things about this is obviously when we're putting in the infrastructure, we'll be putting it at the back of the footway if it's on the footway, except not the back, the curb edge of it, to minimise any trailing cables issue. The trailing cables comes into play when people want to home charge and they don't have off-street parking. One final point, the government recently last year put back that 2030 date to 2035 for no internal combustion engines, just for your own information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just if I can just pick up on a point, particularly on trailing leads, could the leads not be sort of eye level, sort of on a goalpost system?
Nobody's ever proposed that one to me before, but my immediate thought is, see, that comes down in high winds, or, kids hang off it and swing off it, or I don't know, there might be, but maybe it's something we should add to the list and ask DFT to consider when they're thinking about their guidance.
Okay. Jenna, you want to come in?
Sorry, just very quick. Obviously, I think we've just had an insight into what Anne was doing when she was a child, so things in our way. Sorry, no, I was just going to add, in terms of the criteria question, it's not really nailed down, but paragraphs 40 and 41 in the report have kind of got the overview of the type of areas that we're looking for and where we can't currently use the Levi funding. But I would say if there is a real particular interest from the parish, they're welcome to kind of contact us and discuss that, because obviously we're keen to make sure that we can monitor the impact through the pilot. So if we've got willing volunteers. The other thing to say is if the parish themselves have any location, perhaps a car park or anything that's theirs, there are other grant funding available online. And again, we could perhaps point them if that is helpful. There's sort of other ways to kind of get involved in some of the rural locations as well. But it was just to see if that's helpful. And just in terms of if people's sort of expectations, they can at least see in the report where the funding can be applied in the short term. And very much, as Anne said, our early delivery will be using that funding criteria, so it does give some idea of where we'll be going. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Anne, you'd already mentioned this. The elephant in the room, of course, is the national grid. And the national grid is struggling. There's this new connotation on service centres that lack an enormous demand on energy. They need masses of energy. Going forward, I don't think that they're talking now of billions to update the national grid, and it's needed doing for the new technologies and to be able to carry the power loads that's necessary. So I think it's a good debate and it throws up lots of questions, but we're not really getting the answers. We're just plodding along, which we're probably going to have to do because there's nothing immediate. Because without the grid capacity coming up, all of these other ideas of parking in streets and all the other bits and pieces, the demand would be colossal if it was to go forward on a realistic basis. And as I say, the innovations now on these new service centres are massive power resource. What they need to go, and obviously these are bankings and technologies and all sorts of organisations that just deal with billions of data daily. So there is a big demand. So I don't think we're going to be at the top of the tick list for it. But obviously, we've just got to keep going with what we've got. I understand that. But at the back of your mind, you've got to think, unless we've got a new grid capable of taking the sort of demand that we all visualise and the experts know about. But, you know, somebody's going to press a button and say it's going to cost 10 or 20 billion. Let's get on and do it. And there, Mr. Chairman, that's your problem.
Well, see if I can comment on behalf of the National Grid. Okay. Down to the National Grid then, Mr. Harrison, I'm afraid. Anything from you, Pat, Jenna, on that? No? Any other questions? Mr. Phillimore, briefly, please.
It's not a question, it's just an observation, and it's kind of backing up Anne and this principle of digging lots of channels across footways for EV charging when all the other major utilities are in the same footpath. Not that, and they go, and it's not that long ago since we had a fibre optics installed right across the county. So I think there's some massive challenges, let alone the maintenance issue.
Thank you. Mr. O'Shea, it's lovely and sunny and warm here. It looks rather dull and cold where you are. Would you like to comment before you go indoors?
Oh, you are a joker.
Look at them clouds going.
Oh, yes. They are on this one, aren't they? But it's a bit cloudy today here anyway. But no, yet again, another good debate. I think what we've tried to do is work across the county to give everybody the chance of EV charging. It is a very, very difficult area. We have been successful in getting the grant, and obviously I work with the offices to make sure that the whole of Leicestershire gets it, not just, you know, the actual towns where we've got like Hinkley and whatever. They've also already got charging points in car parks, but we'll be looking to actually help Hinkley and everywhere else, you know, Wigston, you name it. I'm not just picking on one, I'm just giving, you know, variations. It's a hard task to do, but officers are dedicated to make sure that it goes across Leicestershire and even to the rural outlands of Belvoir. You know, we're Leicestershire. We're not just Leicester. You know, we want to go across the county. So, yes, I'm happy with the policy, and we had a very, very good result on the consultation, and I look forward to taking it forward with the officers.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. I think, yeah, very good debate on that. And I think I've to come back a bit to reality and say that, you know, given that 1 in 4 could be electric going forward, to look at the current funding we have and to realise that that will not be sufficient to, you know, to complete a strategy or whatever we want to do. So we're going to be reliant on even more funding coming forward and more input from private and other bodies as well. So just wanted to put that out there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Okay, we're asked to note the report. We will take the report as noted and ask the comments made by members today to be noted and presented to Cabinet in September. Agreed? Thank you. Well, thank you for the debate there and the questions and answers back. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 12, dates of future meetings. The dates of future meetings scheduled for the rest of 24-25 are to be noted.
Chair, point of order, the dates are wrong on there. It states 24 for every date.
Should be 25 from January.
Yeah, we can amend that, Mr. Murray. Thank you very much for picking that up, correcting it. Mr. Allen, it's your fault. Okay. Okay. So that's item 12. Item 13. Any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent? There are no urgent items. So thank you for attending today's meeting. I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Enjoy the rest of your break. Mrs. Wright, thank you. And members of the Environment Committee. Thank you very much. Lovely. I said 3 o'clock.